Today's video is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode of Crimmander Deck Techs, and of course this week I'm starting off with my paper deck, a deck that I just recently finished and got a huge boost thanks to Zendikar Rising. And of course, it's my most recent favorite tribe, and one that I've been trying to push a little before Zendikar, Rogues. So naturally, we're going with Anowon, the Ruin Thief. Many of you have asked me for my list, but before we go over my list, let's talk about Anowon. It's a 2 in blue and black. Other rogues you control get +1/+1. Whenever one or more rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, that player mills a card for each 1 damage dealt to them. If the player mills at least 1 creature card this way, you draw a card. Now, so that means that anytime you get to connect with any of your rogues, your opponent will mill that many creatures, and hopefully, if you're attacking multiple players, you'll get to draw multiple cards. So this card on its own does a lot, right? First off, it's a lord for rogues, which, rogues definitely needed, that weren't, like simple like automaton or whatever that artifact lord is. And on top of that, it's a way to be card advantage. It's a 2/4, so the 4 toughness, a nice size, so this way, it doesn't just immediately get burnt out or like trade with everything in combat. And so this deck is all about being tempo, playing a bunch, it's got this like aggro mill game plan. And so with the aggro mill game plan, here are a few mill enablers. And with these mill enablers now, you can, first off, Thieves Guild Enforcer is probably one of the biggest, the best things that the Rogue deck got, thanks to M21. It's a cheap 1-drop that has Flash, first off, and then it mills your opponents, each opponent, right? So that means that you can mill the whole table, not just any one targeted person, and that is amazing. And as obviously if it gets buffed up, it becomes a 3/2 with Death Touch. But the thing is, it's constantly milling your opponents every rogue that enters play. And of course, you have Consuming Aberration. We all know this card already. It's been around in EDH for quite some time. Every time we cast a spell, our opponent's going to mill until they reveal a land card. And they put all those cards in the yard, so these together will just kind of get our opponent's yards loaded up, thus, giving us more things to do. But let's go a little more in depth about what's in the deck. Looking to put your party together? Well, don't you worry about it, because Card Kingdom has all of your Zendikar Rising singles up for order right now at cardkingdom.com. So as I had mentioned earlier, the deck is loaded with a bunch of cheap little threats, but the thing is, these threats, though small in size, as you can see, like Slitherblade, 1/2, Changeling, Outcast, a 1/1, and all these are just really X1s, or just no bigger than like 2 to 3 power and toughness, right? But that's because they're all unblockable, and the deck focuses on its evasion and ability to get around our opponent's blockers, which is extremely relevant because we have tons of cards in this deck that there are tons of payoffs for it. But yeah, we really do focus on the unblockable aspect. For example, not only do we have our cheap threats here, but we also have cards like this. And if you look closely here, so more, just as I said, more unblockable stuff. We have Thassa, God of the Sea. We have Keeper of the Keys. These cards all kind of just do what we want to do. I mean, obviously Thassa also helps us scry, but more importantly, that 2-mana activate ability to continue to make our stuff unblockable. And of course, Keeper of the Keys, whenever it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. So that means we get the Monarch, and on top of that, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you're the Monarch, creatures you control can't be blocked. So this means that is we could have a massive army, and if the opponent's board is empty, or all of the table's board is empty, we're just going to be able to just keep swinging through, keep triggering Anowon and all this other stuff. When I say other stuff, I mean, okay, this is not technically a rogue thing, but it kind of is a rogue thing in spirit. Of course, you figured it out. Ninjutsu. So we have cards like Fallen Shinobi, Ink Eyes, Servant of the Oni, Silent Blade Oni. All these cards will then synergize with the fact that most of our creatures are unblocked. Now, the thing here is you'll still be casting these creatures, so these cards can get countered and whatnot, but that's where we kind of have Rogue Jitsu in the brand new legendary in Zareth-san the Trickster. This is just the ability of Zareth-san. Of course, you can always counter it with things like Stifle and whatnot, but the thing here is I don't see those cards all that often. Maybe your playgroup has a ton of them, but I believe that most playgroups I play in, I don't see those cards. So Zareth and all that, these cards just kind of hit the board, allow us to go ahead and just cast things from our opponent's hand, from their their graveyard, get stuff from the top of their deck, and then we get to like Fallen Shinobi will allow us to just play stuff off that's exiled off the top of their library, or the top 2 cards. Zareth gets any permanent in their graveyard, so this includes crazy artifacts let's just say a Great Henge or something like that. Ink Eyes gets a creature. Silent Blade is the one that will cast a non-land card without paying its mana cost from its owner's hand. So really just a very disruptive deck. to also build on the fact that rogues are unblockable, and we have the ninjutsu, rogue jitsu, all that stuff, we also have the rogue mechanic in Prowl. You may have seen this from a while back, because, you know, some of these cards are also a lot older. Like, you'll see Notorious Throng, and of course Knowledge Exploitation and stuff like that. But all these cards are all triggered for a cheaper cost when you connect with a rogue this turn. So example, one of the cards, let's go over the new one, Enigma Thief, a 7 mana 5/5, but it can be 4 mana. You may cast a spell for its prowl cost if you dealt combat damage to a player this turn with a Sphinx or a rogue. Flying, when Enigma Thief enters the battlefield, for each opponent, return up to one target non-land permanent that player controls to its owner's hand. So cards like this are just really, really powerful because, you know, for 7 mana, sure, like that's already like kind of decent. But the fact that you can pay 4 mana for a 5/5 flyer and then also bounce a bunch of things, that's super sweet. Of course, you know, you have Knowledge Exploitation where you can dig through an opponent's deck and then just take a sorcery or instant and then cast that without paying the mana cost. I'll take that every time. And then of course Notorious Throng, which will then give us another like turn. And of course Stink Drinker, kind of like a Lord effect, pretty much a Lord effect for all unblocked creatures. So once again, more payoffs for our stuff being unblocked. Speaking of Lord effects, we have Soaring Thought Thief and Una's Blackguard and Metallic Mimic. You know, thanks to Zendikar Rising, we got even more lords, not only just Anowon, but Soaring Thought Thief, one of my more, like, my favorite lords, actually, I would say, because, I mean, it's so flavorful in what it does for rogues, right? I mean, yeah, of course, there's the +1/+0, it would be nice if they were able to add toughness and whatnot, but the fact that it has flash, and it also rewards you for, whenever you attack with a rogue by milling an opponent for 2. That's amazing. Obviously, if you can make copies of this, these stack. So if you play standard and whatnot, you've probably seen that happen. But this is only whenever 1 or more rogues. So it's not for each rogue attacking that they mill to. But still a very solid effect. And once again, the flash is a huge thing for me. And of course, Una's Blackguard. We've seen this for a while. Sweet card when we have tons and tons of rogues, because they'll all enter with a 1/1 counter on it, and whenever those creatures with 1/1 counters deal damage to an opponent, they'll discard a card. So once again, just attacking our opponent's hand, getting more stuff in the yard, just being super duper annoying, and you love it. And of course, this Metallic Mimic, kind of like not a rogue necessarily until it enters the battlefield, but a rogue nonetheless, an honorary rogue. And since it gives +1/+1 counters, if you ever get that with Una's Blackguard, that means more 1/1 counters are being given out, and of course more cards can get discarded by your opponent's hands and whatnot. Obviously the cards aren't discarded for each 1/1 counter, but I mean just more of your stuff will have 1/1 counters. When you have a ton of lords, well, not a ton, but you have a decent amount of lords and your commander itself is a lord, it's nice to have a little army around it, and of course you can generate that army because this deck has ways to just give you tons of rogue tokens. Bitter Blossom being one of my favorites. This just generates a 1/1 black fairy rogue token on your upkeep for 1 life every turn, or every upkeep, on your upkeep, I mean. And of course, you know, I love this artwork. This is the old, like, this is like the old WPN Players Reward promo that I had from way back when, so it's kind of warped, but whatever. And of course, Notorious Throng makes its way back in this deck tech because it also generates a 1/1 Black Fairy Rogue token. And of course, the Una, Queen of the Fae, who I was always a huge fan of. I had a Una deck before this, so obviously I'm gonna put Una back in this deck, but you choose a color, target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. For each card of the chosen color exiled this way, create a 1/1 blue-black fairy rogue token with flying. So just once again, more fairy rogues. And of course, I love this artwork, by the way. Oh, the International Women's Day promo, so like, anyways, tons of sweet ways to just like generate tokens. With how much we're going to be milling with the armies that we're going to be generating off our little like rogue generators and whatnot, our little threats, obviously it's going to be tough, right? Milling a whole table out, like just milling like a group, like what is that? That would make 300 cards need to be milled when it comes to Commander. But you know, there are other ways to close out the game. While you're milling, there are some advantages to it because you'll have cards like Sir Conrad the Grim, which pings each opponent for 1 damage whenever a card or creature card enters the graveyard from anywhere. And of course, it itself has an activated ability to mill each opponent. And of course, you've seen Mind Crank. This has been a combo piece in so many things. And as you can kind of see, there's a little bit of a cute combo here. You have Mind Crank plus Bloodchief Ascension. Mind Crank makes it whenever an opponent loses life, that player puts the top many or that many cards from the top of his or her library into the graveyard. which has now been like errata to milling. And then, of course, Bloodchief's Ascension. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 life, you put a counter on this thing. And it goes live once you have 3 or more counters on it. And once it's live, anytime a card enters the opponent's graveyard, they lose 2 life and you gain 2 life. So if you have these 2 together, that means you're just going to keep going off for like 5 ever, really. Now, there's tons of ways to go infinite in this deck, like specifically like Mindcrank and Dimir Guildmage. And like there's also like Helm of the Host plus Leyline of the Void. Personally, I don't like using too many infinite combos. On top of that, Leyline of the Void kind of dunks on some of our rogue synergies, like some of our cards relying on our opponent having an X amount of cards in their graveyard. So plus, like, opponents having stuff in the graveyard means more tools for us to use and play with later. So all around, these are just a few of the pieces. We also have a few other payoffs. A few other payoffs, like Command the Dreadhorde, which means that while we're milling and doing all this, we can now, as I said, with everybody having a graveyard is a way for us to have more tools later. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to cast a big Command the Dreadhorde, or at least as much as our health is willing to allow it. And yes, of course, Rise of the Dark Realms is a thing, but Rise of the Dark Realms is like, what, like $40 or something? And on top of that, this can get Planeswalkers. So maybe you're playing against a Super Friends deck. This can hit Planeswalkers. That's pretty nice, and it's 3 mana cheaper. And then, of course, you have cards like Sepulchral Primordial. I probably butchered the pronunciation on that, but you can reanimate cards from all the graveyards. There's the blue one. I think that's Diluvian Primordial. There's just tons of ways to reanimate stuff from graveyards, and with rogues just milling as much as it will be, with the little chip damages here and there, thanks to Anowon, there's gonna be tons of good targets for us to grab. While we're also able to steal stuff from graveyards or reanimate stuff, that's pretty much stealing stuff from our opponent's yards. We also actually have a ton of other theft effects. Of course, we wouldn't be rogues if we didn't. We have Thieving Skydiver, one of the newer cards, which is amazing in EDH, and I think something that almost a majority of blue decks can just play. It just feels like a solid staple in blue, as it's like it can grab any artifact, and if it steals an equipment, it auto-equips it right away. Obviously, it doesn't steal, like, X can't be 0 on Thieving Skydiver, so it can't take something like, a Mox Opal, but it can take a Soul Ring, it can take swords, it can take I don't know. No, well, I mean, not Paradox Engine, as that's banned, but, Lithoform Engine and things like that. Of course, Thada Adel Acquisitor, man, I really butchered that one, is another way to steal artifacts and whatnot. I mean, like, example, me, I do love preventing certain people from assembling Cauldra, who knows? And of course, with that, we have Gonti, which can steal anything off the top 4, and if we have ways to blink Gonti or return Gonti, obviously that's going to just give us more cards to play with. And Notion Thief, though not a theft effect, or, like, I guess, I mean, it is a theft effect. You're just stealing your opponent's draws. I mean, this is just expected, right? Notion Thief has just got to be in, like, every deck that is blue and black, and, like in EDH, right? Because there's so many people with crazy draw engines. Notion Thief just feels great there. And, of course, Agent of Treachery to steal anything, just super powerful permanents that our opponents have. And this can even steal the Homeward Path, so the opponent can't use Homeward Path to get their stuff back. You knew we would eventually get here. Here are our artifacts. We don't play that many mana rocks. We only play 4. I know that I'm probably going to get roasted for that one, but I just feel like the deck has so many cheap threats. You know what I mean? That the mana rocks and whatnot are just there. Like, I get it. Ramp is very good, but I'm choosing to only play 4. Plus, Skyclave Relic kicked is like 2 more mana rocks. I think Skyclave Relic is really good at EDH, so definitely a favorite of mine when it comes to mana rocks. Outside of the mana rocks, we do have other artifacts like our equipment, which is, we've got Cloak and Dagger. Now, obviously, this just makes sense. It's flavorful with rogues. It gives our rogues a little bit of a power bump, and on top of that, the Shroud effect, which, by the way, be careful, because that means you cannot equip your other equipments if you have Shroud. And of course, you've seen Lightning Greaves gives our stuff Shroud and Haste. Whisper Steel Dagger, one of the new cards to come with the Anowon Precon, and I played with it a little bit, and it's pretty powerful, being able to cast whatever creatures are in our opponent's yard, so just more ways to reanimate stuff out of the opponent's yard, and we can spend the mana however, like, we can spend mana as if the card didn't matter, like, or the colors and whatnot, the requirements didn't matter, so we can spend 5 blue to cast, I don't know, something in green. And then, of course, we have Sword of Light and Shadow, Sword of Body and Mind. These are, like, 2 very powerful swords in this deck. I specifically love Light and Shadow because of its ability to return rogues back to our hand, and things that potentially maybe we mill over, we throw away. And of course, Sword of Body and Mind, one that's not normally popular in EDH because, I mean, like, Most of the mill decks I see don't even like have creatures that attack. It's all right, but I feel like it's right at home here because it gives us, first off, protection from green. So the only thing this deck does not get protection from so far is red. But yeah, like protection from green and blue, which is very solid. And the fact that you get to mill 10 and then also get a wolf. The wolf is just the cherry on top, but really it's the mill 10 that I'm really a fan of because, you know, like I played a game, you know, on Commander Clash, and people were surprised with how much this deck can really just throw our opponent's cards away. And people forget about it because we're usually distracting them with these small little, like, threats that are chipping away at their deck and whatnot. They're not thinking about it. No one thinks about it really until the very end of the game, and then they're like, wait a minute, where are half of my cards? And Sword, Body, and Mind continues that and also boosts the power of our rogues and just gives us the pro green that we need. The swords are obviously interchangeable. You can choose which ones you like. Feast and Famine's okay, but we're not really... I don't know. The untap is all right, I guess, but like I really like the ability to return creatures and also mill. You all know I'm gonna obviously play some counter magic. It's blue, so naturally I've got to have counter spells in the deck. What you will be shocked to see is, yes, you have noticed that there is no Sensei's Divining Top or Counterbalance, and though I love those two cards especially together, we don't have enough big CMC cards to where Counterbalance is efficient in the deck. However, cards like Counterspell from the Jace Spellbook, or the dual deck, the anime dual deck. And then, of course, we've got Mana Drain. I mean, everybody knows I jam Mana Drain wherever I can. Arcane Denial, a solid card. And, of course, Fierce Guardianship. And I know that there's some mixed feelings on the free spells for Commander, but I've actually been a huge fan of them because now, when you're playing a creature-based Commander deck and whatnot, you don't feel as bad for tapping out a Commander. Like, especially in blue, you don't feel bad for tapping out for your Commander. And, yes, that obviously, you know, is a little problematic when it comes to maybe like, oh, well, a deck that was hoping for you to tap out, now I'm going to use this board wipe or whatever. But now you always have something to protect yourself, even when you're tapped out. And, you know, it's still cheaper than Force of Will. So I am a fan. And, of course, you know, in every deck, you still need some kind of board wipe, sweepers, and some way to interact with your opponent's stuff. And, of course, you know, when you're playing blue, you got to have the go-to staple in a Cyclonic Rift. And Toxic Deluge is always solid because it's 3 mana and it's just -X. So, you know, it's going to hurt a little bit, but at least you can get around Indestructible. And, of course, Kindred Dominance. This card is just great when you're playing any kind of tribal deck and need a board wipe. And Necromantic Selection allows us to bring more stuff back while killing the board. So, like, we still have a decent amount of ways to interact and whatnot. So, we're not entirely just going to try to mill and whatnot. Like, sometimes you just got to blow up the board. Of course, with Zendikar Rising, you're all probably wondering how many lands I'm playing, if I've cut all my lands for land spells. I'm actually playing, I believe, 34 actual lands, and then 3 spell lands here. Obviously, Glass-Pulled Mimic being solid because it just copies a creature that you have and makes it a rogue. And then we have Aghanim's Awakening to reanimate stuff. And I think Seagate's Restoration is just a solid way to just, I don't know, even if... I know that it sucks, but sometimes I'm just willing to pay 7 mana to draw 1 card. And other than that, though, that's the entire deck. I mean, I have a few, like, basics in the deck, as you know. I mean, I play a total of 34 lands. Don't you love it? I mix and match all my basics, so I have all the artwork that I can get. Look at that. Isn't that great? Also, this was given to me at PAX East, so thank you, I believe, to Mike. Thank you, Mike, for giving me that. That is very generous of you to do that, Alter. Thank you. Other than that, of course, I do want to say thank you to everybody that has watched the video and the deck tech. You know, I wanted to personally do paper stuff this time around just because I'm still a fan of paper Magic. And, you know, it's nice to see your paper cards and play with your paper cards. So this is for all you people that still love all your paper Magic cards out there. And, of course, you know, we'll do some deck techs using the tool and whatnot. And so if you ever want me to do a deck tech on any of your decks, feel free to drop a link or, an email or anything like that. And you know where to reach out to me. And if you want to see the full deck lists with all the cards and all the lands, feel free to go to the MTGGoldfish website, as that's where it'll be posted up. Other than that, feel free to leave a like, a sub, and of course hit the bell icon to be notified when a brand new video comes up on this channel. And as you all know, we've just split off and made our own Commander channel, so this is where you can go to get all your Commander content. And thank you for watching the first episode of Commander, and other than that, I'll see you at the next one.